In the middle of a warm night in the Mojave wastelands, you follow an old abandoned road. As you walk up the hill, you are stopped by a man who says,
"Whoa there, pal. You better slow down or you'll get blown up like the rest of the idiots who thought they'd scavenge in boomer territory."
Hello and welcome to Anatomy of Fiction. In today's video, we are going to be discussing the Boomers. More specifically, are they the strangest faction in Fallout New Vegas? To do this, we are going to have to go over three things: the history of the Boomers, what exactly makes the Boomers so odd, and other odd groups in New Vegas. So, we should begin with the history of the Boomers. The history of the Boomers actually begins all the way back in 2054. Like with most other vaults, this would be the year that Project Safehouse would be set in motion. This project being the agreement between the government and Vault-Tec. Project Safehouse was created due to several scares experienced in the years prior, including the New Plague and the Euro-Middle Eastern conflict, making the government of the United States of America feel as if they needed some way of safeguarding and preserving future generations of Americans. This, of course, would lead to the construction of the vaults. Vault 34 would be one of 5 vaults created for civilians within the broader Mojave region, and like most others, this vault would have its own social experiment planned for the confines of the vault. What is interesting about the location of Vault 34 is actually where its geographical location would be in the real world. Because if we go back to the Cold War times, specifically 1969, we would see the same location, which is Frenchman's Mine in Clark County, Las Vegas, was also actually a fallout shelter. So what was a good location then is apparently just as good of a location now. But anyway, moving on. During the August of 2063, we would see the construction of most vaults being completed. So this is likely when Vault 34 was finished. With the completion of the vault, we would see what would essentially be the Apocalypse is Coming drills. Many people would stop coming after the first few drills, considering it was done so frequently. Moving on to October 23rd, 2077. The air raid sirens would go off yet again. Many would believe this to be just another drill, and would just ignore them. However, this would be the day the bombs dropped, so the lucky few who entered the vault would be the only ones saved. Inside the vault, the population would be booming in the safety of the metallic box that kept everyone unaware of the dangers of the outside world. With everything being seemingly peaceful over the many years the door was closed, that was up until the year 2231. The vault would divide into 2. This was over a decision made by the Overseer at the time. The Overseer had prevented access to the armory. He had a remote lock installed. This was due to the vault becoming overpopulated. The Overseer saw this as a means of preventing a future disaster from occurring inside of the vault. However, he did not expect the backlash that would occur. A group of the vault dwellers, who would become the future Boomers, would argue that there should be free access to the armory as they had the right to defend themselves. Considering that they were in a sealed vault where everyone knew everyone, what were they supposedly defending themselves from? With the Overseer saying no to those who wished for access to the armory, the dissidents would start to riot. These members would grab as many weapons as they could access, taking most of the heavy weapons inside. They would manage to escape from the vault and make their way into the wasteland. We see this through Pete, the Keeper of the Story's explanation.
Ages ago, long before I was born, we lived underground. Everyone had guns, but the Overseer wouldn't let us explode anything, not even a hand grenade. We left and wandered the wastes.
After leaving the vault, the Boomers would eventually locate the Nellis Air Force Base, which they would make their home in for the next 50 years, with you, the courier, arriving in the year 2281. But what happened to the vault? Considering it did not cease to exist, or just implode after they stepped foot outside of it, well, we need to jump back to the original conflict in 2231 to understand what remains of Vault 34. So with the Boomers raiding the vault's armory, taking the majority of the weapons inside, they would not be the only group rebelling against what they considered to be the overly tough rules enforced by the Overseer. So after the Boomers had left the vault, the main exit was sealed by the Overseer. This was done to prevent any other members from having the same ideas and leaving the already overpopulated vault. This actually would not fix the issues with overpopulation, but who could have guessed? anyone apparently. And a few years later, the overseer would propose methods of controlling the population issues. However, this would yet again anger members of the Vault, with others attempting to storm the armory again and overthrow the overseer, with all of this being unsuccessful. However, they were successful in doing other things, including damaging other vital parts of the Vault, including the main computer system and reactors cooling systems. So this damage would lead to further issues inside of the Vault. The reactor started to leak radiation. The engineers inside of the Vault did attempt to fix this. However, the damage was too significant to repair, so they sought out escape. But the main door was sealed and the computer was damaged, so there was no escape. So those inside hoped that there would be either an external intervention, opening up the Vault, or the automated unsealing of the Vault, which would save them all from dying of radiation poisoning. Well, instead, the majority of those inside would become ghoulified by the time the courier has the opportunity to visit in 2281. So this is what became of the Vault that the Boomers abandoned. Now that we have discussed the history of the Boomers and their beloved Vault, we should move on to what makes them so strange. With this, we should discuss the important characters we interact with in the Boomer faction. We should begin this with Mother Pearl. Pearl is the leader of the Boomers, being potentially the oldest member of the group. She was actually one of the original group that left the Vault, doing so as a young adult. Pearl was one of the few members of the faction who was old enough to have experienced the outside world along with Vault life before they settled in Nellis. So she remembers the battles discussed in the Boomers' history and the Mojave wastelands. Pearl is welcoming but cautious of newcomers, but also of the New Vegas neon lights she sees in the distance as she realizes that change is coming to their doorstep. Pearl, being the leader of the group, does have absolute power over everyone in the faction, meaning that her decision to allow an outsider into the base cannot be denied, even with their previous rules of not interacting with those outside of their base. No outsider is allowed inside of Nellis, and no Boomer is allowed to leave Nellis.
I'm Raquel, Master-at-Arms for the Nellis homeland. Mother Pearl, our eldest, wishes to speak to you.
So the courier in this circumstance is a special case that would not have been the most agreeable decision with the other members of the faction. Now we should discuss one of the youngest members of the Boomers with important jobs. This being Pete, Keeper of the Story. Little Pete had a rather recent promotion from apprentice to the Keeper of the Story, when his former teacher had a little learning moment of his own. Who could have guessed?
I know I seem kind of young. I was the apprentice keeper of the story until a couple months ago, but old Keeper Don, well, whiskey and landmines don't go together. So it's up to me. I bet you want to know everything about us.
Pete takes his job and the history of the Boomers rather seriously. However, he still has a childlike excitement when discussing the history of the group and what they believe their destiny is. Pete most likely has never seen any real battle, or at least would not be old enough to recall any, considering the last war in the Wastelands was 5 years prior, back in 2276, this being Operation Sunburst, and later the first battle for Hoover Dam, with the Boomers being isolationists in their approach to surviving the wastes. They were not the faction to be involved in the military squabbles of other factions. So Pete still has a childlike excitement and innocence when it comes to the idea of war and fighting, not fully understanding the extent of their story and the future he presents as their destiny. Now we should discuss Jack, the apprentice mechanic to Loyal, who also happens to spend his free time using a pair of binoculars to see if he can spot the red-headed lady he has set his eyes on, even though they have never met. He spends his time obsessing over Janet, one of the workers from the Crimson Caravan Company, but with Pearl's rules, no outsider can come inside and no Boomers can go outside. But with the arrival of the courier, things get shaken up, leading to the first time someone has been allowed permission to meet the Boomers. So I guess this is a post-apocalyptic 90-Day Fiancé Mojave Wasteland edition, but he is mostly kept reined in at work by Loyal, his boss. Now Loyal could be considered on the grouchier side when compared to some of the other Boomers, however he is also one of the members that treats the courier somewhat nicely. Loyal, like Pearl, most likely helped to establish the Nellis base for the Boomers when he was much younger, as it is stated that he lived at Nellis since the Boomers left Vault 34. So he is also likely to be part of the original group to have left the Vault. witnessing the battles and the hardship they experienced to be able to set up camp in their current home. Individually, they mostly seem like normal people. So what actually makes them so strange? Well, when it comes to the boomers' story, their obsession with weapons actually comes from all the way back in the vault, as their experiment directly relates to their obsession. Vault 34 was intended to observe how people would react when left around an overstocked armory that had no locks and no way to prevent them from accessing it. This would have created a culture where the use of weapons for fun was part of the everyday norm, and most people would have been using them. When the overseer would have put the lock on the armory, this would have been a massive change to their culture. Considering they were very gun-centric, the society inside of the vault, this would have been basically changing the foundations of what many of those inside the vault valued, which, as we can see with how the boomers reacted, it was not a welcome change. The boomers' cultural obsession with weaponry has carried over through the last 50 years, and into their most recent generations. We see this with how they discuss history and how they view themselves as more advanced when compared to other groups.
They were savages with knives. We blew them up with frag mines and grenades, burned them with flamethrowers. It was neat, but there was a downside. For every 43.6 savages we killed, we lost one of our own.
This in part explains why the boomers have become such an isolated society within the Mojave wastelands. Their shoot first and ask questions later attitude towards outsiders is what led them to being so isolated, rather than working with other communities within the wastelands. Yes, it has protected them to a degree, but it would have also caused some issues, making trading harder when it comes to necessary repairs, like that with the solar array, as well as their desire to reclaim the crashed B-29 bomber from the lake. The boomer society is an interesting one, as the foundation of their beliefs is that everyone being armed is the foundation of social trust and responsibility, with their obsession and the founding of their base in Nellis even leading to a sort of religion surrounding their ideas, this being around the bomber. We see this with the part of Pete's speech surrounding their destiny.
Nellis has revealed many secrets. It has taught us how to fly the bombers once based here, and it has taught us where to find one. And that is our story so far. For this last image is our future. To restore the bomber, to fly the open skies in armored safety, raining high explosive ordnance upon ignorant savages. This is our destiny.
We see a similar sort of religion with the Brotherhood of Steel and their obsession with technology, viewing it as more valuable than their fellow human. Boomers essentially have a similar religion, however. Theirs is more surrounding their own personal destiny and worshipping weaponry more specifically than just technology. You could even compare the behavior of the boomers to a cargo cult. But what exactly is a cargo cult? Well, a cargo cult is a phenomenon we see in the South Pacific as a leftover from the Second World War. An example of this is on the island of Tanna in Vanuatu. This island worships a specific soldier by the name of John Frum. As part of their worship, on one day of the year, they dress as American soldiers, marching with their bamboo poles to imitate rifles. This is on the idea that if they prayed to this man and worshipped him, that he would one day return with gifts as a reward for all of their loyalty. This is similar to the boomers. Boomers worship their weaponry, the idea of warfare, and the idea of old world technology. They worship this technology. You find them dressed in old military uniforms, using the training simulators, in hopes of one day being able to access the plane that they believe is their destiny. The virtual reality and various information stood in as their soldier providing them the information, but it would still lead to the idea of the promise of outsider technology, the worshipping of what would essentially be outsider technology considering they had no access to the planes back in the vault, and their obsession with them, along with the military uniforms, is why they could be considered a cargo cult. So their strangeness comes from their almost religious weapon obsession. But surely the boomers are not the only strange ones in the New Vegas wastelands. So who are the other odd groups within the wastelands? Well, one of the more standout groups in the New Vegas wastelands could potentially be that of the think tank. Yes, the brain bots over at Big MT. If you ever encountered Dr. Darla and their fascination with humans, I could leave it here as a claim to strange. But while this faction has many interesting and odd quirks, we see this with each of the doctors' personalities and talents. All of the doctors except for Darla have a lack of understanding and actually experience disgust when it comes to the human body. which is rather interesting when you consider their origins as well being human. Dr. Klein, the loudest and self-elected leader of the bunch, has somewhat of a superiority complex, although he is often wrong about things and is the reason why Big Mountain is more of a big crater. Whoops. With Dr. Zero or Dr. O, depending on your preference, being the opposite, having an inferiority complex, and only ever being seen to create one successful robot who, like the scientists, is a neurotic mess. Muggy and the Brainbots are not the only strange robots inside of the former research facility. There is also the Toaster. He very much has his own interesting personality.
I am online once again! Tremble, world, before my electric heating coil of doom! A toaster is just a death ray with a smaller power supply. As soon as I figure out how to tap into the main reactors, I will burn the world!
There is no mention to who created such a small metal box of evil, but it is to be assumed that it was one of the scientists working at the Big MT facility, considering you can't just go about your day finding sentient and psychotic toasters throughout the Mojave. Otherwise, that would be an interesting new enemy to fight. But the think tank and the boomers are not the only strange entities within the Fallout New Vegas game. No, we also have the White Glove Society. Now the name gives off an air of prestige and invite-only society kind of vibe. But what it does not give off is their origin story. Because why would such an upper-class elite group have any skeletons in their closet? Well, where else are you going to store the bodies? That is why. Yes, because they were originally cannibals. So maybe think twice before you order the pork at the Ultra Luxe Casino. But don't worry, this is a thing of the past, after Mr. House had signed a deal with them, making them one of the 3 families on the strip. Or is it a thing of the past? Well, maybe you should ask Mortimer about that. So who is the most strange faction inside of Fallout New Vegas? Well, every faction has their own quirks, with the Brotherhood playing hide and seek inside of a bunker, whilst worshipping technology, the Legion and their choice of armor, and Mr. House being, well, Schrodinger's corpse. Is he the dead come back to life, like a zombie, or is he just really wrinkly? So every faction has their quirks, which is what makes them interesting, but some are just quirkier than others. What makes the boomers so strange is their worship of weaponry, and their prophesizing relating to the bomber aircraft, and their desire to rid the Mojave of the supposed savages as part of their so-called destiny. This being more of a techno-medieval fantasy and religious ideal, rather than a strategy, which the boomers are more known for. Which is what makes the boomers so strange. Their obsession with preparation and training, this being the opposite of their self-proclaimed destiny. They seem so strategic and well thought out, until their desire surrounding the bomber is brought to light. The argument surrounding their militant behaviors is that it stems from their previous culture, however, the obsession with the plane does not. Considering, how are you flying planes in a vault? Kind of an enclosed space that doesn't have an airstrip, doesn't even have the air space. You know, it's a vault, not much space to fly a plane or even a drone. The same argument could be made with the White Glove Society and their cannibalistic tendencies. Their desire to snack on their neighbors comes from their days as a former tribe. This was used as a survival method rather than poor character. It may have evolved now, however, it still has a basis in the past. Their desire to eat it now has more of a, oh look, it's a luxury, you know, eating endangered animals or doing something you shouldn't kind of vibe, rather than I need to do this to survive something awful that I'm experiencing. The think tank over at Big MT, their obsession with experimenting on anyone and anything, could be seen as a remnant of their past as scientists and the degradation of their brains from the years of being alive. Considering these brainbots, their brains have been pre-war scientists. They've been around for more than 200 years. Not exactly how long a brain should survive. But it could also be from the fact that they were crazy before and are crazy after. BMT was not exactly known for ethical or normal research. Groundbreaking, but interesting in ways it shouldn't be interesting. No. Although the boomers' isolationist policies and their obsession with the technology have contributed to strange beliefs and strange behaviors, these have become integral to the boomer faction, they are not the strangest faction. Many of their behaviors do have a basis in reason. They are isolationists due to the hostility they were met with when they left the vault. Their belief that everyone should be armed and everyone should know that each other is armed, it comes from a perspective of mutual trust and understanding. As with the policies of being unarmed, weapons can and do get snuck into places. We see this with the holdout weapons inside of the casinos. So with this, it comes with the idea that it is safer for everyone to be armed rather than to not know if the other is armed. Kind of like the Cold War standstill where both sides had nukes, but neither would use it out of fear of retaliation. So although the boomers may be strange, many of their actions and beliefs do have understandable reasons. So let me know in the comments, do you think the boomers are a strange faction? If you enjoyed this video, then you will enjoy this video. It is about Big MT, how the company and their employees may have affected the wastelands.